Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk with you about Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails is a web application development framework. It's one of several. As the name implies, it runs on the Ruby language, but there are other frameworks like Django, which runs with Python, and there are several others. Some are PHP based. And what that just means is that they create a way for you to rapidly deploy an application. The framework itself gives you a framework of folders and files that you can get started with very easily with very little code, and then you're up and running. It's a little bit like Bootstrap, for those of you who use Bootstrap in the web design class, but it also adds this opportunity to connect a form with a database very easily and get you started with an engagement application. So really the hardest part to me of using Ruby on Rails is getting your application development environment set up. You need Ruby, the programming language. You need to upgrade that. You usually have it if you have a Mac, but you'll probably have to upgrade it. And there are instructions on this site that I've indicated here for upgrading it to a Mac with Yosemite. Every time there's a new upgrade in either the language, Rails, or your operating system, there's probably new instructions that you have to go through to get everything that you need. So depending on what platform you're using, you'll have to find the instructions to allow you to do that. You'll need Ruby Gems, which is a series of plugins that work with Ruby to provide different functionality. You'll need the Rails application, and you will need a database. We'll have SQLite 3 that we'll be using locally, but there are others, MySQL, and Postgres. We'll be applying Postgres later when we upload this to the web because the site that we're using to upload this to the web actually requires Postgres. And then you just need to work in the terminal and a text editor of some sort. I'll be using Text Wrangler as we have throughout the semester. So Rails, like many other application development frameworks, use what we call the MVC architecture. That stands for Model, View, and Controller. And the model itself, it runs a lot of the rules for the application. The view is what the user sees, and the controller kind of works between those things. And the model works directly with the database. So it basically sets up the rules of who does what in the application. So we'll be working in all three of those areas as we start our application. And I'm going to jump ahead in the handout because the first part of the handout gives you a basic look at Rails, but I wanted to also take a second to show you what the framework looks like, the series of folders and files it creates when we create a new Rails app. So we'll be doing that in a second, but I wanted to jump ahead to the more advanced creating an actual engagement application with a database here. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to come over to the terminal and we're going to CD into our desktop because I'm going to put this on the desktop. And we use mkdir to make a directory that's just like making a directory on your computer called musicpole. And I'm going to CD into musicpole. And then I have to, I use the Ruby version manager to get started here to be able to set up individual versions of Ruby depending on the installation that I'm doing. So I'm going to set this up where I do the RVM use Ruby, and I'm going to put the current version of Ruby that I want to use in the command. So the current version is 2.1.5. Just to be sure I didn't get the error message here for a reason, I'm going to run that one more time. Set the arrow key up. And it looks like it created the version for me. And then I'm going to install Rails, gem install Rails in this version. And this may take a few minutes, so I'm going to jump ahead here, but if it gets stuck on installing some documents, don't worry about it, just wait it out. It may take 2 or 3 minutes for that to go all the way through. So wait till you get the $ for your command line. So we've installed Rails, and the next thing we want to do is the Rails new dot command that creates the new application in that folder. So it creates the application, and wait for that to finish, and then we're going to run bundle install to make sure that everything is created in terms of the instructions that the application needs. So next we want to look at what the application does. It sets up what they call CRUD. It's the functionality that creates, reads, updates, and deletes records on your database. When you have a database, you want to be able to create a record. You want to be able to read that record if you need to go back to it. You need to be able to update it if something has changed, and you want to be able to delete it. So you'll see how quickly with this one line of code we're about to write that Rails sets up the full, what we call a scaffold. It sets up the full application And we're going to set up an application that just has 3 fields: name, genre, and comments, and they're all strings to start out with. So that's what this Rails generate command does. But with this one line of code, we basically have the entire CRUD, create, read, update, and delete, that we need for our application. So I'm going to take this entire line, Rails generate scaffold, we're going to call it favorite because we're looking for favorite genres, and let that run. And it's going to create our application for us. And then we need to run the rake db migrate command. And that just connects the application to the database associated with the application. And then we want to run the server. We say Rails server, and that emulates the web server so that we can actually see our application. So I need to go to the localhost /favorites to see the application, and look at that. Just like that, we have our application. That is a HTML form that we would fill out. So I'll put my name, my favorite genre, and a comment, and say create favorite, and it will accept that favorite into a database. Here is where it tells me it was created, and I can edit that if I want to, or I can go back to the main page and I can see that it has created that and put it in a table with the show, edit, destroy, all the CRUD that we need to be able to work with the database. Just that simple. So everything else that we do now is modifying the app to either make it look better or to have different functionality. So the first piece of functionality that I want to try is to validate some of the fields in the database. We want, when someone's filling out the form, we want to make sure that they put in the name and the genre. So we're going to validate that that is present. So I'm going over here to Text Wrangler, and I'm going to open up the entire application just by clicking on the top folder name, Music Poll, in Text Wrangler. So we can see the whole application, and I can open up the app and I can look at the model, views, and controllers folders here, and these are the files that we're going to work with. So all I have to do to validate the presence of name and genre is take this line here that looks at the name and the genre for the model and puts that into the model. The model's already created for you. You just have to put it within where the class opens in the end and save it. And the server's still running in terminal. And when we refresh that and we try to input an empty form, it won't let us do that. So that validation works. There's other types of validation we can use, like requiring the uniqueness of something like the name. And now we want to do some things with the layout. We want to do some basic changes to how this looks. So we can do that in the HTML and in the CSS that the framework created for us. So I'm going to grab this code here for the TR and go into the view for the index page, because I want each line of that table to alternate in color. So by changing the TR, and it's this TR down here where we're including our favorites, and it's saying to cycle through these different classes. And we're going to create those classes, list line even and list line odd, in our style sheet, which is part of the style sheets in the framework, scaffold.css, because we created the scaffold. And now that I have those in there, if I refresh the page, you'll see that the first line is now a different color. If I create a second record, so I'll put in Tom, and he likes pop music, and a comment, and create the favorite, the second line should be a different color when we go back to the list. So you can see how you're working with the different files gives you control. Now we want to create a drop-down, which is kind of important. So we want to go into the view here, and we want to change the line in the view for the form where we're putting in the genre text. So that's right here. We're going to replace that line with what we have here to create a list of genres instead of having the person type it in. And then we'll create that list in the model, and that allows us to add anything we want to that. So if we want to upgrade it later to have additional genres in the list, and we can put that in above the validate command and save that. And now when we go to the application on the web and we put in a new favorite, we see that there is a drop-down for genres now instead of having to type it in. So that just makes it easier. We don't have to worry that somebody's going to put in crazy genres or genres we don't want to capture. They might spell it wrong or use the wrong capitalization. So we've controlled for that with a drop-down for genres, just like the drop-downs we created before. And we get a total very easily by using the name of the application .count and putting that in our index page. I'm going to put it at the bottom of the page right above the links for new, and we'll refresh that, and it says total records 3. So that counts all the records in our database with the count functionality. But we want to count all the individual votes. So we have to create variables to do that. So first I'm going to go in the model and create a scope for every one of these. The scope is where the genre equals that particular name. Then I want to go into the controller and I want to define the variables associated with each of those. And so the scope creates an array that includes all the votes for the particular genre. And then we want to just give that variable a name so that we can use it later. So that's why we have the @rock votes, @country votes, and it's looking at the length of the array that was created by the model. And then we want to copy this for the view so that we can actually show these variables, rock votes, country votes, etc., somewhere in the view. So I'm going to put this on the show page at the bottom of the page. We'll have the count for everything just like we did on the index page, and then the count for each individual genre. Go to that, and we'll add a new favorite because it's going to only show on the show page. Add a different entry into our database. And we will see the totals of all the votes there. So far, we have something in every category except for other. Now we want to show the results in a chart, and this is actually kind of fun. There are 2 ways that I can show you how to do it. Google Charts has an image that we can just insert our variables for each one of those numbers, and it will calculate a chart for us like that. So just copy this code, and you'll see where the variables go for the individual genres that we're using. And you'll see how Ruby gets inserted in the HTML with the angle bracket and the % sign. And so that's telling you that you're actually inserting Ruby into the code. And when we refresh that, we have a nice chart there. Now this chart isn't interactive, it's just a flat image chart. So we work with the Google Chart API. So I'm going to grab this code here that is the full Google Chart API script that we work with, where we can add a variable for each one of these items, and we can insert the variable that was created by the application to put this onto our page and create a more interactive chart. And then insert that chart with the div tag, as we did when we were working with the Google Charts API ourselves. So we'll copy that, and we're going to put this also on the show page. Now you'd want one or the other. You wouldn't want both of these on the page, but I'm just showing you the differences in them. So we'll save that page and refresh. And now we have the interactive Google chart that we can modify or customize any way we want to. It has a little bit more interaction than the flat chart that we have there. So that's it. That's how you set it up. There are other things that you can do that I'm not going to go through in this tutorial, but are on the handout as you start playing with this. And then the next thing we'd want to do is be able to launch this application somewhere on the web. So an easy way to do that is to use Heroku, and that's a website you need to go to and set up an account on it. I'm going to stop the server running here in the terminal with Control-C, and I'm going to come over here and log into Heroku from the terminal. And I've already gotten my account information set up by setting up a Heroku account at Heroku.com. So I'm logging in with my email and my password, and Heroku will actually have you create some SSH keys, and that will be relevant in a moment. You'll need those as well. You'll see when I put mine in. So we're going to come over here, and we need to change one thing in our application. I had mentioned that we're using SQLite 3 for development, and in production we want to use Postgres because that is what is required by Heroku. So we do that in the gem file. We change this line that just says gem SQLite 3 and replace it with these lines that have different databases for development and for production. I also have that Rails 12 factor because that was a glitch that didn't allow the CSS to attach to it. So now we want to say bundle install after we save that page to create a new gem file. And make sure you do it without production, the -- without production, because we're using the different database in production versus development. So that ran, cool. And then we want to use Git to initialize this repository, just like we did when we were pushing things to GitHub. We want to git add everything in the folder, in the repository, and we want to git commit that. Just like we did, this is just the same way we used Git before. Then we're going to create an application with Heroku, and we're just going to do it on their Stackseater application. This is just code that you can just kind of follow to get it set up on Heroku. And so we'll create this application. And next we have to do git push Heroku master. So that will actually push the application to Heroku, and that's where your SSH key is necessary. And this will take a few seconds, but when it is done running, you'll be able to look up the apps processes with Heroku PS, or look at the logs, Heroku logs, if you got any sort of an error. But then we'll, as soon as this is done, we'll say Heroku open, and we'll see if our application is working. So let it run all the way through. We'll have to rake the database on Heroku, and then we'll be able to test it out. Okay, so here we're going to do Heroku open. And we'll actually be able to get the application open. Don't worry about getting this error message. We're going to switch to the favorites folder in a second. I'm going to do the rake command, except I need to do this with the Heroku rake command, Heroku run rake db migrate, not the regular Heroku, or not the regular rake db migrate that we used when we were running the app locally. So we get that to run. And then we want to come back to the application in the browser, and you'll see that Heroku gives these applications a funny name, strange name up here. Mine is Guarded Bayou with a number after it, but we put /favorites, so because that's what we named our application, and we can see our application actually running. Now, there are ways that you can make the index page be the home page of your actual application. I'm not going to go into that in this. There are ways that you can hide the back end so that the people on the web are not able to create or destroy in ways other than you want them to with the form. But this just shows you an easy way to get going with Rails, be able to launch something on the web. Heroku lets you get it up there quickly so you can get people playing with it and testing it. It's not really an environment that you would want to have for actual production. But it gives you the whole experience from beginning to end of creating some sort of an engagement app that responds to users' input. So I encourage you to play with this. This could be the next step after you leave the class, is to learn a web application development framework.